Welcome to Common Space, podcast dialogue amongst friends who happen to be pastors at Alamo Heights United Methodist Church. My name is Chris Estus, and I'm the pastor of Recovery. Let's go around the room and introduce ourselves.
I'm Ryan Jacobson. I'm one of the teaching pastors here at Alamo Heights.
My name's Darrell Smith. I'm also one of the pastors here at Alamo Heights, and just lovely to be with you, Chris, because I love you so much.
You're sweet. All right, well, we're glad you're here, and I guess I'll start.
Yeah, tell us who you are.
Let me tell you about
Why are we
me,
here?
my favorite topic, me.
Let's do that.
I grew up in upstate New York, but I got to Texas as fast as I could. Arrived here in 1983 after college. Been in the billboard business for 40 years. And I came to faith after sobering up in a anonymous 12-step fellowship. By 1999, I had decided I had enough. I ended up, with the help of people and the help of God, getting sober. And my spiritual path and my spiritual awakening began there. It was at the anonymous 12-step fellowship I was invited to a church service on a Sunday morning. And it happened to be an evangelical church on the north side. As soon as I got there, I kind of dug it, man. Had a kind of a rock concert vibe, great band, sort of a Zig Ziglar meets Ryan Jacobson and Darrell Smith kind of thing.
I've never met Zig Ziglar.
And I got into it. And I soon quit my night job as a bar band guitar player and became a contemporary Christian praise and worship artist by joining the band there. And it was wonderful. And I did that for about 10 years. I got to go to the Hillsong Conference in Australia 3 times, got to go with the pastor to South Africa and tour the mega churches there. Got to tour some mega churches around America. But all the while, I wasn't really buying the theology. It really wasn't doing it for me. And I knew there was a deeper dive to be taken. So I actually prayed. I was exposed to a book called Velvet Elvis by a writer named Rob Bell. And I said, you know what? This guy's saying things that I didn't know Christians could say. I didn't know you could be a church-going Christian and believe some of the things he's talking about. And so with that, I prayed. I asked God to present me with a Rob Bell type. And just a few short weeks later, this guy showed up in my life, Pastor Scott Hare, who happened to be associated with Alamo Heights United Methodist Church. We had coffee, and it turns out his mentor, Ray Vanderlaan, also mentored Rob. And I thought, wow, this is a divine connection. Scott invited me to something that he was doing with Pastor David McNinsky at Alamo Heights United Methodist Church called The Quarry, which was a discipleship program for people with ministries that didn't have formal education. Now, by this time, I had something called the Pioneer Group that I started in 2001, which took a look at the biblical roots of the 12-step movement. And that was pretty significant in town, and it still is to this day. So I had a ministry, but I did not have formal training. And so I came to Alamo Heights to be part of the Quarry. And there I was exposed to a whole lot of theology. Everybody from N.T. Wright to Walter Brueggemann to, who else did we read there?
Marvin Wilson.
Yeah, Marvin Wilson. Really good.
There was reading?
There was reading, yeah. Got to go to Israel twice with Scott leading the trip, and that's where I met Ryan. Ryan was one of the trip leaders on that trip also in 2011. So I went in 2011, 2013, and became really enamored with the study of the Hebrew roots of our Christian faith. And that was a big focus of the Quarry as well, and it was a big focus around the church here at that time. From there, I kind of moved my membership over here, and I moved the recovery ministry that I had, which is called the Pioneer Group, by the way. I moved it over here to Alamo Heights United Methodist Church in 2011, and I've been here ever since. Sort of tricked my way onto the staff by just showing up. And I told David that I was going to be the intern, and he agreed. So
Who's David?
David McNinsky, our rabbi, who was our former senior pastor here. He was senior pastor of this church for over 20 years. And I was fully embraced into the pastoral team here. I came on staff in 2020 as the recovery pastor, and I still am to this day. Here's the genesis of Common Space. I was at Whole Foods in Alamo Heights, one lunchtime, I guess. And there Darrell and Ryan were sitting at a little round table on the sidewalk out in front of Whole Foods. And I said, "What are you guys doing?" He said, "Well, we're hanging out in the parish." "Hanging out in the parish doing what?" "Well, meeting with the people of the parish." I said, "What, the same 10 people that come by every day?"
I don't like the tenor of this story.
No, seriously.
But it is true. They were tired of being in the office, so they thought they would go out to the parish to minister to the people.
The parish is better than the office.
Yeah, well, that's true. But I thought, you know what? Let's do something like worthwhile. Let's go do something for real. So I said, I tell you what, come with me to Haven for Hope, which is the transitional living facility, homeless shelter here in San Antonio, and we'll go teach them something. What do you think? I was going there every Tuesday night. I brought the Pioneer group there every Tuesday night, and we were doing a meeting with 100 or more residents every Tuesday night. And so I knew that I could arrange something. And so we talked about it a little, and we had stumbled across a set of blogs that Rob Bell had written called What is the Bible? And we decided to use those as the basis for our discussion. And so we started going down there every Wednesday at noon and presenting What is the Bible to the residents of Haven for Hope. And it was marvelously wonderful.
And that was what? That was like January of 2014, so we've been having this conversation for 10 years.
So who are you saying that with the 2014 over there?
Ryan here. So Chris already told a lot of my story, it seems like. Chris arrived in San Antonio in 1983. I arrived in this planet in 1983.
Oh my gosh. I'm so old.
I have undershirts older than that.
You have a wallet older than that. I've seen it.
So yes, my story. I ended up at Alamo Heights United Methodist Church through some of the same people and events that Chris ended up here. But I grew up mostly in New Braunfels after moving here from the Pacific Northwest. I had a rather tumultuous adolescence. Had a chronic and major depression for about a decade that could have killed me, but fortunately I did come to a point where I realized that something needed to change or I would end up dead. And so what was an intellectual atheism became a very slow conversion into following this Jesus character. And that quite literally did save my life, making that transition. I had studied, I've always been somebody that studies a lot, and so when I came into this life, I continued to study a lot, continued to study this faith, its traditions, its history. And though Chris says he met me in Israel, we actually met at the quarry first. I noticed him because he had long, beautiful, bountiful hair. He wore a lot of turquoise. He had African beads. And there was also this other kind of ginger, long-haired guy that was there.
Wow.
His name was Darrell. Yes. So I met both of them at the quarry, I think. But the way that I got to the quarry was also through our friend and mentor, the Reverend Scott Hare. I was at his church when I first became a Christian. He took me to Israel in 2008. I was about 6 months into my journey of faith. And so that trip and what we learned on that trip became quite literally foundational for me in my own faith journey and the way that I approach this faith. And so like Chris, the Hebrew roots of this faith are very important to me. I've learned that faith is not something that's quite as graspable as a lot of us want it to be. We seek certainty a lot of times, but this faith is not something that's really built to find certainty too often. And so I like to ask a lot of those same questions that Chris likes to ask, and figure out how those questions impact my own understanding of God, my own understanding of my relationship with God, and the relationship that I have with this world around me, and the relationship that God has with this world around me. And so I did, through Scott, come into the quarry as well, enjoyed that, and came on to staff here at Alamo Heights in 2010 as a missions pastor, and I've served in a lot of different roles since then here in this church, and happy to be here.
Darrell,
Hey, man.
would you like to share?
Okay, it's tough for me to admit in this collection, but I'm actually the weirdo amongst you weirdos, which is strange for me to say. But I was born and raised in the Methodist Church. I've been here pretty much my whole life. I was baptized in the Methodist Church at the age of 6. I was confirmed at the age of 13. I started working for the United Methodist Church at the age of 25, and was then later appointed as a pastor at the age of 40. That might make it sound like I'm a great United Methodist, but I think if you ask the United Methodist, they might say that's still up in the air, still up for debate
Still
on
evaluating
whether or
that
not
one.
whether or not I'm nailing it. There are some things that I really struggle with organized religion and in all forms. But there are some things that I really love about the United Methodist Church, into which I've been born and raised and trained. Probably at the top of that list, at least as I can discern at this point in my life, is that the United Methodist Church has allowed me to explore. At our best, this has never been a tradition of circling the wagons. It's always been a tradition of going out and going further and pursuing past the horizon. It is a tradition that asks, yeah, if you do go out there and play in the strange places, come back and tell us about it, and we'll see what we think. So I've basically spent my professional life doing that. It's how I met Chris, was going out and playing in the strange places with Chris. My memory of how we began this conversation is I came up to the church on a Tuesday night, expecting to be a part of a meeting that had been scheduled, and that meeting got canceled. And as I was packing up my stuff, Chris was filling up coffee urns to go down to Haven for Hope, and he saw that my meeting had been canceled and asked me what I was doing, knowing full well that I had no excuse to say no. And I said, well, I'm doing nothing. My meeting got canceled. And he said, great, you're coming with me to Haven for Hope. So I got in the car with Chris, and as we're driving down the highway, then he leans over and says, by the way, you're teaching tonight. And I had not even been there before in my life. I'd never met the people, had no idea, but got into a room with Chris and a bunch of my sisters and brothers who are in recovery, and we had a dialogue around, I don't even remember, but around a particular scripture or story, and we had a great time. It wasn't always easy, but it was very worth our time, so that when Chris did come and accost us at Whole Foods while we were just trying to enjoy our lunch and said, let's do this down at Haven, it seemed like a pretty easy idea. And I do remember we started with like 6 or 7 people at Haven for Hope in a small classroom. And of the 6 or 7 people, we were 3 of them. So I guess that means there's only 3 or 4 others. But, you know, at our peak, I guess before COVID, that we had moved several times into larger rooms, and we could get between 40 and 60 people in a dialogue, which is about the max that you can actually have a functioning dialogue. You can't really do it with more people than that. But we had a great time. Like I said, it's not always easy to have these conversations because there's so many things in faith. There's so many things in the Bible. There's so many things in organized religion that are problematic, that need to be named, addressed, sometimes discarded. And so it can be hard, but it's always worth the time and energy that we put into it. And the last thing that I would say about our genesis is we were all terrified to have this conversation in the church. We were thrilled to have it at a recovery facility or with people who were experiencing houselessness, but we were not thrilled to have it with Christians in the church. It felt like a hostile environment, and we were happy to keep our heads down. But then 3 grandmas from this church, Pat Wiseman, Mitzi Dunn, and Carol Cawley, came to us one day and said, we hear you guys are doing this down at the recovery shelter, and we want you to do it for our Bible study here. And again, we were terrified and kind of resisted at first, but then those 3 grandmas showed up at Haven for Hope and participated.
Yeah,
and
do you remember
watched
what
us.
the first lesson was that they heard?
No, what was it?
It was on Moses' circumcision.
Oh, yes.
And they said, we can't get enough of this. Y'all come teach us.
Come talk to us about circumcision. We love this. Yeah, but you know, those 3 women were matriarchs of whatever this has become. They are the ones that reminded us that, yes, go out and play at the edges, but come back and tell us about it. Come back and challenge us with it. And so we did, and it was a hard first 2 years to go around through this curriculum that we've crafted with Rob Bell's content in the church, but we did it, and we've been doing it ever since. So now, like Ryan said, we're at a decade of doing this both in the church and in other places. And now we have a reason to probably talk about it online, I hope.
Ryan mentioned something about certainty, and an author that we reread and listen to, Pete Enns, who's a theologian, has a podcast called The Bible for Normal People. He says this. In fact, he wrote a book called The Sin of Certainty, and he maintains that the opposite of faith is not necessarily fear. The opposite of faith is certitude. Because if I'm certain about something, then I don't have to have faith. Part of the faith journey that is critical is to not be certain. And if you're not certain about something, how do you find out about it? You ask questions. How do you begin a dialogue about faith with other people? You ask questions. And then listen. And then share yourself. So that's sort of the basis of what we're doing at Common Space in general, but in particular on this podcast. We're interested in taking people's questions. What are you wrestling with? What are you confused about? What do you need more clarity about? And you'll get the perspective of these two really smart guys as I ask them leading questions. And perhaps I'll add a word or two as well. My area of expertise is, certainly is from recovery. And I actually look at the Bible and I look at faith through the lens of that, and been doing it for a long time. And so we find that to be helpful for people as well. But these guys actually have education in these areas, and they're a really amazing source of answers. So don't be afraid of not being certain, and don't be afraid of questions, because the growth is in the question.
Yeah, another reason that I think the questions are really important is that we don't want this to just be an intellectual exercise. This class has never been just an exercise in talking about what we think or believe. But this class has always been something, and these dialogues have always been something that have been rooted in the practical circumstances of the people that participate. There's a reason that it was so good to start this conversation with people experiencing houselessness and coming out of the depths of their addiction. Those practical circumstances led to real questions and real wrestling with what these people conceived of the divine as, and the stock answers that they had been given throughout their lives were not answers that were good enough to help them out of the circumstances where they were. And so practical questions, some of these questions do get a little bit heady, but they always come from a practical place. My own faith journey coming out of depression, the reason that I was in depression, what sparked that was because one of my best friends of my youth for years and years was killed in a car accident. And because of that car accident and because of her death, I went on that journey of intellectual atheism where I needed to figure out all of the answers to the questions of faith so that I could prove exactly why a good God did not exist that would allow my friend to have been killed in a car accident. And so those kinds of questions, what kind of God would allow this, are important questions, and they're questions that most of us have. Most of us have experienced extremes, dark extremes and great extremes. But the questions that we're asking here have always been rooted in those circumstances and those experiences that people have, because they are very big, very good, very valid questions that need answers.
Yeah, what I like to say is, we're having a discussion about faith here, that where people bring their experience, their strength, their hope, so that we get to know the Bible better, we get to understand faith a little better, we get to know God better, we get to know each other better, and through that we get to know ourselves better. And a lot of that comes through story, instead of somebody up there just here's what the Bible says. No, it's not like that at all. To see it through the lens, and these stories through the lens of people's personal experience is it's a great path to growth and understanding.
Yeah, I think we're making this point, but just for clarity's sake, what we're doing here, we're still hosting Common Space twice a week, every week, live and in person. If you're in San Antonio area, you can come find us. We want to see you. That's not what we're going to do on this podcast. We're not going to take these microphones into our dialogue and record them. Real dialogue has to be unrestrained. There has to be some protections around that. And so what we're doing here is something different. This is kind of supplemental. We're hoping that people who have participated in Common Space or are participating in it, or even if you have never been with us, but you just are somewhere else and you have these questions, that you'll send them in, that you'll send the questions you've always had. And then we're going to dialogue around your questions. We're going to use your submissions to create an online dialogue. And those submissions will also have that same protection of anonymity. If you would like it, if you want us to say your name, we will. But if you want to just throw a question into the middle and see what happens, that's what we love to do. So please do send your questions in, and know that that's what we're trying to do here, is create the dialogue online, because as Chris said, that beginner's mind, that humility of always being someone who can receive education, always being a learner. That's why we've been able to do this for 10 years. We have the 60 dialogues that we lead, and we've done them a lot. Like, we know them by heart, but not once have they ever been the same. That's why the three of us, I'm going to speak for you, but that's why I keep coming back, is because every time I go through this conversation with a different group of people, I learn something that I did not know before. I get continually transformed and changed. And that's why we're doing this now, hopefully to offer that space to more people, that common space that we all share.
So it was just pointed out to me that maybe what I said a moment ago may have not been, fully explaining what we're doing here. Because I said there are lots of very, very good questions that deserve and demand answers. One of the things that we have learned through this dialogue is that we don't always end up with an answer. Even if a question is really good, we don't always end up with a certain answer, like Chris talked about with certitude earlier. But what we have found is that often these questions lead to other questions. Often these questions lead to shared experiences where people will tell stories about something that they have experienced in their world that relates to a particular scripture or relates to a particular theological idea. And that these ideas are widely varied. There are a lot of different people with a lot of different ideas, and a lot of those ideas are very good. And so when we do discuss these questions, we don't often come to a final pin. We don't stick a pin in it and say this is the final answer. But it's usually rather open-ended, and we invite the conversation to continue very often.
Yeah, so I would say, as we wrap up this introductory episode, Chris, that I would just want to make sure that anybody out there listening that doesn't know us, don't feel like you're outside of some boundary. I know we've all talked about our experience in the Christian church, and then I talked about being a United Methodist, and that can start to be very constricting, but that's not who we are. It's our launch pad. Thomas Merton talked about the different points of origin for wrestling with faith. He talked about them like beaches from which we all swim and go out into the deep waters, but that once you get out into the deep waters, it's all the same. And so you don't have to be a Christian to be a part of this podcast or to be a part of this conversation. You don't have to be you dang sure don't have to be United Methodist. Just if you're wrestling with faith, if you're wrestling with these questions, if you're wrestling with institutional religion or organized religion, we want to hear from you, and we hope you'll send some questions in, and nothing's out of bounds. Ryan already told you we started this with grandmas and circumcision, so take us there. We'll go with you.
Well, that'll do it for this episode of the Common Space Podcast. We're sure glad that you stuck around and listened to us, and look forward to seeing you next time. And until then, may your eyes be full of wonders, your heart full of joy, and your footsteps firm as you walk with God.
Peace.
Peace, friends.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Common Space. Don't forget to follow or subscribe to this show so you don't miss a single episode. If you have a faith-related question you'd like to submit to the show for the chance of it being featured on a future episode, visit ahumc.org/questions to submit. That's ahumc.org/QUESTIONS. If you'd like to contact the podcast team, email us at podcasts@ahumc.org. That's podcasts@ahumc.org. You can also visit our website, ahumc.org, anytime. Any related links are also in this episode's show notes. Again, thank you so much for being a listener. We truly appreciate your time.